Parshas Eikev. This week's Parsha, starting with Parshas, that's the 8th chapter, the Torah describes riches and deprivation. And the Torah says that when you get into the land of Israel, you'll be successful. And we are urged, the Torah urges, Hashem urges us to observe the mitzvos so that we will be successful. There seems to be a causal relationship there in the land of Israel. Then the Torah says something which on its face sounds puzzling. V'zacharta, after you v'rishtem es ha'aretz asher nishba Hashem l'avasecha, and you inherit, take possession of the land that Hashem promised to your forefathers. Now we're on pasuk Beis, that's verse 2. V'zacharta es kol haderech asher lichacha Hashem elokecha zeh 40 shana. And you remember the entire trek that Hashem caused you to go through for 40 years, Bamidbar. Why? What was the purpose of that trek? Lama'an anoscha. In order to, some say inui means afflict, others, as we've talked about, means to control against your will. So it's to control you. L'nasoscha, and to test you. La da'as, to know. Es asher bilvavcha, that which is in your mind. Hatishmor mitzvosavim lo, will you follow his mitzvos? That's puzzling. Hashem knows what's in our minds. Why does he have to put us through a test in order to understand? This is similar to an observation that the Ramban makes when the Torah in Prero says that Hashem nisas Avraham, and God tested Avraham, and the Ramban asks, why does Hashem need to test anybody? And his answer is so that Avraham is aware of his own capabilities. Here we have this word lodas. It doesn't. It's not ascribed to God, that God should know. Although you could read it that way. You could read it that way to mean that you will demonstrate before God. But you could also read it to mean that you should know. In other words, you need to go through, you being children of Israel, need to go through challenging times, testing times, trying times to know what you're truly made of. And that is, Ladas es asher bilvavcha, what's really inside of you. Hatishmor mitzvosavim lo, will you follow his commandments when it's challenging? It gets even harsher. Vay'anecha vayar ivecha. And again, he, you might say, afflicted, oppressed, controlled you, and caused you to be hungry. And then he fed you man, which was strange. You'd never seen it before, nor had you heard about it from your parents. Lama'an, so that, hodiacha, kilo ala lechem levado yichya ha'adam, kol motzav pi Hashem yichya adam. Because not by food alone shall man live, but rather on everything that comes out of God's mouth. In other words, had we gone directly to the land of Israel from Egypt, we would have simply gone from deprivation to plenty and would not have had the interaction over the decades in the desert that created a pattern of deprivation, water, meat, etc., the Jews complaining and God responding. We see that we're learning here. We're learning that God's in control. That's the message of the trek through the desert. Now the Torah continues. There's consciousness raising here. We talked about consciousness last week. We're talking about building up opinions, attitudes, character. Then we have V'yadata im levavecha. This is something you must know. You must settle it in your mind. Ki kasher yaser ish es beno Hashem elokecha mi'asreka. Just like a man will chastise his son, his child, he'll discipline him. Why? Why is it? So Hashem does the same thing. Why? In other words, challenges, adversity, bring out character. They cause a development of something which is in potential, but not necessarily actualized. The challenge causes the actualization of potential. The Torah continues to describe the success that we'll have when we get to the land of Israel, because it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a land that has chitas, ora, gefen, te'ena, v'rimon, shemen, dvash, the 7 species. It is overflowing with all kinds of material good. And what's going to happen? V'achalta, v'savata, u'v'rachta es Hashem elokecha. You'll eat, you'll be satisfied, you'll thank God. But it comes with a risk, and that is addressed in verse 11, pasuk Yud Aleph, Hisham elocha, pen tishkach es Hashem elokecha. You got to be on guard, because you might forget God. Once you're successful, you might forget God. You might forget to observe his commandments. Pentochal V'savata, maybe you'll eat, you'll be satisfied. Batim tovim tivnev yoshavta, and you'll build nice homes, and you'll settle in them. And your possessions will increase. V'ram levavecha, this is your Dalet 14, your heart will become, your mind will become haughty. V'shachachta es Hashem elokecha motziacha me'eretz Mitzrayim v'beis avadim. You forget God who took you out of Egypt, and who took you through adversity within the desert, and gave you water from a rock. Now we're on 17, Yud Zayin. V'amarta b'levavecha, and you will say in your mind. In other words, you won't necessarily articulate this, express it, but you'll think it. V'amarta b'levavecha. Kochi v'otzem yodi asa li esachai leza. It is my power. It is the strength of my hand that made all this treasure for me. But there's an antidote. V'zacharta es Hashem elokecha. Remember God. If that happens to you, and it sounds like it's inevitable, v'amarta, it could be that it's part of the pen, it shouldn't happen, but you could read it as saying, when you become successful, there's a moment where you take credit. You take exclusive credit for having succeeded. V'zacharta es Hashem elokecha. Remember God. Ki hu hanosein l'cha koach lasos choil. He's the one who gives you the strength to amass the riches, to become successful. Why? Leman hakim es briso asher nishbala v'zacha k'yom, so that he can fulfill his promise that he made to your fathers to give you the land and to make you successful. Let's look at Targum Onkelos, the translation, the Aramaic translation of Onkelos, on on Posuk Yud Zayin and Yud Ches. The same word, and Onkelos translates it differently in the two verses. In Yud Zayin, it says, V'semar belibach cheli uskaf yadi kanoli yos nechsaya ha'elan. It is my power, my resources, my personal abilities, and my strength that caused me to amass all of this wealth. Now in Yud Ches, he says, V'tidkar yos Hashem l'koch arehu yahav l'cha eitza l'miknei nechsin. And you remember the Lord your God because he's the one who gave you the idea. He's the one who made you think in a way that you could get into that business, make that investment, go into that line of work. In other words, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, according to Onkelos' translation, not only gives us the physical power, but he gives us the inspiration to apply ourselves in a way that will result in success. We didn't create this ourselves. Our parents had something to do with it, but as the Gemara in Kedushin says, there are shalosh shutfin ba'adam. There are three partners, the mother, the father, and the Almighty. Without any one of them, it doesn't work. The Almighty could make it work without anything else, without anyone else, but he has set up the world so that every human being is the result of a mother and a father and him. And he's with everybody. And what the Torah is saying is, this is not a Musar Shmos, this is just explaining these verses, especially according to Onkelos, that the Almighty is the one who sets up the conditions for our success. He also sets up the conditions for our failure. I've heard somebody once say that he knows a lot of people who are very fine and conscious of the Almighty, and they will give him credit when they succeed. But when they fail, they beat themselves up. And maybe the Almighty gets the credit for your failure as well. In other words, we do what we think is best under the circumstances. Whether we actually arrive at the right result is in the hands of God. The only thing we control is the effort. We don't control the result. And this may be why the very first mitzvah in the Torah is Peru or Avu, is to be fruitful and multiply. And according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, a man is supposed to have at least one son and one daughter. Now, what happens if you get up to heaven at the end of your term of your tour of duty here on this earth, and they go through the checklist? The heavenly court goes through the checklist and says, how come you didn't have, I see you have 5 boys. You didn't have any girls, which is what my wife and I had for our first 5 children were boys. Well, how come you didn't have any girls? You didn't give me a girl. What am I supposed to do about it? The first mitzvah in the Torah, it teaches us that we control the effort. We do not control the result. It's Hashem who gives us the power. It's Hashem who gives us the eitzah. When we pick wisely, ultimately the credit is God's, and we are his agents. Have a good Shabbos.